I will turn it over to our Colorado Resiliency Office Director, Ann Miller, to give us some opening remarks, excuse me, and kick us off.
Hello, welcome to our third annual Resiliency Summit. My name is Ann Miller, and I'm the director of the Colorado Resiliency Office. Really pleased to have you here. This event this year is not only an exciting opportunity for us to reflect on the progress we have made to strengthen resilience in our state, but also to vision into the future. A resilient state has been a longstanding priority and continues to be so. And in the Colorado Resiliency Office, we are in the Department of Local Affairs, Division of Local Government. We've been working really hard to bring you another exciting agenda today. So our theme today is Stories of Resilience, Uniting for Climate Adaptation. We're hosting an incredible lineup of inspirational speakers, storytellers, and subject matter experts who will help us think innovatively about the way that government and artists can work hand in hand to find solutions to climate adaptation. Through the power of storytelling, we can move from a place of grief to a place of hope and find commonalities in our collective story that unify us toward a common goal. Here's a quick overview of today's agenda. Following our opening remarks, we'll hear from keynote speaker Ernest House Jr., Senior Policy Director and Director of the Center for Tribal and Indigenous Engagement with Keystone Policy Center. And then we'll be inspired by our Stories of Resilience segment, where our newest Colorado Poet Laureate, Andrea Gibson, will kick us off with a reading of one of their powerful poems. Beth Osnes, professor of theater and dance from the University of Colorado Boulder and creator of Shine, will follow and share how theater and youth have contributed to local climate adaptation planning. And finally, we'll have the incredible musical performance from Dream, Create, Inspire tour that will inspire us to move from climate grief to climate hope. Then Jonathan Asher and I will share some exciting things that are happening at the state in climate mitigation and adaptation work. And finally, we'll end our program with two fascinating breakout sessions that will help us dive deeper into storytelling and climate adaptation. Breakout 1 is titled Beyond Data, Telling Your Community's Story with Multimedia, People, and Places. That'll be facilitated by Marguerite Hardin from the Colorado Resiliency Office, or CRO. Our speakers in this session include Evan Barrientos, conservation filmmaker and photographer and creator of the Fire Forest, and Dr. Phaedra Pezzulo, associate professor of CU Boulder's College of Media, Communication, and Information. And then Breakout 2 is titled Finding Common Ground Through Storytelling and is facilitated by Julia Masters from the CRO. Our speakers in this session include Patrick Keyes, assistant professor at CSU's Department of Atmospheric Science, Sarah Bucci of Climate Nexus, and Heather Bergman, senior facilitator and president of Peak Facilitation. We are so grateful that each of you is joining us today. So it's our goal at the Colorado Resiliency Office to support a long-term, adaptive, and vibrant future for all Coloradans by building stronger, safer, and more resilient systems in the face of natural disasters and other shocks and stressors. Addressing the challenge of climate change is going to take immense collaboration across levels of government and community sectors to implement the bold solutions so our state can thrive into the future. We pride ourselves on providing that local technical assistance to support this work at community level and to help communities achieve their goals. We know that this work begins at the local level, and we are here today to elevate the stories of Colorado communities. It is through this understanding that we build stronger partnerships and identify solutions that address the unique and diverse and urgent needs of our state. Today, we have an amazing opportunity to tap into our imagination with local artists, musicians, storytellers, and creatives. We're excited to explore innovative partnerships so we can better tell our story and come together around common goals. With that, it is my honor and great privilege to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Ernest House Jr. As former executive director for the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, CCIA, for 12 years, Ernest maintained the communication between the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Indian Tribe and other American Indian organizations, state agencies, and affiliated groups. In that position, Ernest worked under former governors Owens, Ritter, and Hickenlooper and their lieutenant governors, along with the CCIA members, to maintain a government-to-government relationship between the state of Colorado and tribal governments. Ernest represented the state of Colorado and CCIA at various federal, state, tribal, and local public policy meetings and provided legislative and government-related information to community stakeholders. Currently, as the Senior Policy Director and Director for the Center for Tribal and Indigenous Engagement for the Keystone Policy Center, Ernest is working with various stakeholders in the areas of tribal consultation, energy, conservation, cultural resource management, and much more. Ernest is a Gates Family Foundation and German Marshall Memorial Fellow and a Denver Business Journal and History Colorado awardee. He currently serves on several boards, including the Fort Lewis College and Gate Family Foundation. Ernest is an enrolled member of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe in Towac, Colorado. He holds a rich tradition as the son of the late Ernest House Sr., a longtime tribal leader for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and great-grandson of Chief Jack House, the last hereditary chief of the Ute Mountain Ute. We are greatly honored to have you as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate that opportunity. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Colorado Resiliency Office, Department of Local Affairs, as a recovering state employee as well. I understand the struggles and the challenges, and just want to thank the folks that are on and work for the department and trying to get and do the best work you can in all four corners of the state. And from someone who grew up, I'm currently right now in the Denver metro area, but I spent a lot of time in southwestern part of the state. And so I definitely know the travels and the challenges. So thank you very much. In talking about this opportunity, Stories of Resilience, I really appreciate the title of this conference because I've talked a lot about American Indian issues. Obviously, as a member of the American Indian, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, it's been a part of the process that I grew up with, and everything from climate change to difficult histories or challenges, or even moving into the future. Resiliency is at the heart of our Indigenous community. And so over the last year and a half, I've put together this Beyond Land Acknowledgements, because I tend to get that question quite often. What is a land acknowledgement? How do you do a land acknowledgement? Should we do a land acknowledgement? Am I screwing up or stepping on anybody's toes when I do one? All great questions. And so I think we started putting this together as a way to talk to community about how, when, what, and what that looks like. But I have a few slides here, and I know I have just a few minutes with you. So I wanted just to go through and kind of just level set some of the historical components that you may or may not know about our two federally recognized tribes within the state of Colorado, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and Southern Ute Tribe. Next slide, please. And as we go through this, I think it's important to, at the 30,000 foot level, look at Colorado's American Indian Alaska Native population. Colorado mirrors the United States, where roughly about 2% of the total US population identifies as American Indian or Alaska Native. The same thing is here in Colorado. If you drill down on that a little bit more, actually over 80,000 American Indians are in the state. That's about that 2%, with over 80% of that population living in the Denver metro area. So a lot of folks think that where I grew up, 7-8 hours away from the Denver metro area on our reservation, that's where the largest population of American Indians are. In fact, that is not the case. That's where our two tribes are, but then Our largest American Indian population is here within the 7 metro district, which includes Boulder County. Also of that is about 150, growing probably closer to 200 tribes that are representative in the Denver metro area. And if you're wondering who the most represented and the fastest growing nations, it's the Sioux nations and the Navajo Nation members in the metro area. I probably look at that same numbers being similar in Albuquerque, in Phoenix, with the Navajo Nation members, part of that fastest growing group. Next slide, please. So if you were wondering where the Utes actually reside, we were actually several different bands, and these are the names of the 7 bands that make up the 3 Ute tribes today. These are actually also now names of federal land managing groups and wildernesses, and Weemanooch Wilderness or Uncompahgre. But these are actually names of our Ute bands, and these bands consolidated over the last 150 years to make up 3 Ute tribes today. The Ute Indian tribe, which makes up 4 of the bands in Utah, the Weemanooch band, which is my tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and then the Mowach and the Capote band, which make up the Southern Ute tribe near Durango. Next slide, please. So focusing on just the 2 Ute tribes in Colorado, the blue outline is the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. That's my tribe, where I'm from. I was born and raised. And then our sister tribes in the red, the Southern Indian tribes in Ignacio. So my tribe's 600,000 acres. We're in 3 states. The Southern Indian tribe's 300,000 acres, mostly all within the state of Colorado. But we also have off-reservation ranches. For our tribe, we even have a ranch up near Gunnison. So that's why it's so important to be a part of conversation around climate around the whole state, because we still have hunting blinds still standing in Rocky Mountain National Park. Our last traditional ceremony until we were forcibly removed from the area, unfortunately, in Garden of the Gods was in 1908. And so these areas still maintain a huge importance, both culturally and historically, to our Ute people and are a part of our ongoing existence. Now, Colorado archaeologists and anthropologists will tell you that the Utes have been in Colorado, what we call Colorado, for the last 10 to 12,000 years. But of course, if you ask my tribal elders, they'll tell you that we've been here since time immemorial. And I think that's important to notice, because as we talk about climate, often our indigenous voices were not a part of the conversation. We're not a part of the table. What's going on in Steamboat or the Roaring Fork Valley or Pikes Peak region or wherever it might be across the state, a lot of our tribes, even the tribes that are here in Colorado or have reservation land within the exterior boundaries, like the Utes, are often not a part of the conversation. But now we're even recognizing additional tribes, historic tribes of Colorado, which actually are 46. These are tribes that were forcibly removed from what we call the state of Colorado over the last 150 years. So if you see legislation or you hear about legislation that's directed towards American Indian history, you'll often hear the historic tribes of Colorado, 48 total. Those are the tribes. Those tribes now reside in states like the Dakotas, Montana, Oklahoma, states surrounding Colorado, but then are often coming back to the state because we are recognizing more of our history. Next slide, please. So I wanted to shift gears around, if you were thinking about, well, who those 48 tribes are. Well, here's that list. You'll see the 2 tribes in Colorado a part of this list, but there's 19 pueblos on here, 19 pueblos in New Mexico. There's Isleta del Sur Pueblo in Texas. So a lot of these tribes were actually forced via treaty and by gunpoint, actually, over the last 150 years. That's making way for what we now call Colorado. That's important to acknowledge. So when we talk about the acknowledgement factor, that's really what it is in moving the conversation forward. Next slide, please. So switching gears to land acknowledgements. Are they enough? Are they not? I mean, you might have seen some of these articles that are out there. There are definitely a lot of opinions. I think with a lot of the folks that I work with and some of my colleagues, what we will all agree on is that there is a way to not do land acknowledgements. If you're doing it just to check a box and because, oh, this group did it or that group did it, that's really not how you should be doing land acknowledgements. But I have also seen land acknowledgements acknowledgements open up deeper conversations around what is the future? What does the next step look like? And are we as an organization committed to working with our Indigenous partners to better that relationship and to put emphasis in repairing that relationship over time? And so I think that's part of the conversation. That's the main point that I wanted to drive with you all today. Next slide, please. I think land acknowledgements can also, and I've seen it here in Colorado firsthand, lead to additional conversations like tribal collaboration. You might have seen this article with the city of Denver. It donates bison to different tribal nations and rotates that every year. They started doing that work, just doing outreach with tribes, and it's going in a great direction. There's a conversation around what Indigenous leaders think about co-managing Bears Ears. I mean, as controversial as Bears Ears was politically, we have to think about at the very beginning, it was supposed to be the first federal land management with co-managing efforts with tribes at the table. That got lost in the mix of everything else. But aside from that, that was going to be the staple moving forward, which completely would change how managing federal lands that were historic and continue to be historic to tribal nations are part of our ongoing conversation. The other thing I wanted to include here is Chipeta Rising celebration. This was a celebration done years back by the community of Salida. For Indigenous Peoples Day, they actually wanted to rename a 13er that was from a name that actually locals were referring to it as Chipeta, but wasn't officially ruled that way or officially recognized with that name. And so they went through the process with the USGS and did that. This was before the conversation around place names was happening or even now that the state commission's put together. But these are some of the things that can start with doing land acknowledgements correctly and start building that relationship that they could possibly go to co-management, they could go to land back, and that's how the conversation starts. Next slide, please. So there's three things I want to leave with you here. Is that the biggest thing that I always try to push is collaboration happens at the speed of trust. I think you've all probably heard that quote before, but I love it because we have to start repairing trust with our First Nations, our First Peoples. All of Colorado land is Indigenous land, and if it's important to the Utes, the Cheyennes, the Arapahoes, the Comanches, any of the other 46 other federally recognized tribes that continue to call Colorado home, they're wanting to be a part of this conversation. And in doing so, that acknowledgement oftentimes is a difficult chapter. But every other tribe all the tribes that I've worked with and the cultural departments, they want to move forward with recognizing what can happen in the future. And so it's not about placing blame. I'm not trying to spread this information or message, trying to make you feel sorry for me or anything like that. In fact, it's to recognize where we can be starting to collaborate and build this process of trust so that that collaboration can happen. I think there's a strong effort of consultation happening at the state level. The Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs office has done a great job. We have more tribal liaisons in different state agencies than we've ever seen since the commission was created in 1976. And these are just some of the three areas on why it's important to have that local tribal consultation, is that it creates those strategies. It leverages opportunities for mutual beneficial collaborations between all these different different governments. And then also meets requirements that are established. It might be a best practice. But I think at the end of the day, I've seen other states don't have the same or don't have the same type of relationship, unfortunately, with tribes in their states. So often when Colorado talks about our state tribal relationship, the two tribes in Colorado will tell you, don't just take it from me. They'll tell you that the relationship is the best, and they brag about it to other states. They use Colorado as a benchmark. And so as we talk about climate change, as we talk about the importance, we should have peoples that have been here since time immemorial be a part of that conversation. Things that we're talking about now, like cultural burning or drought relief in the Southwest, those are things that we're actively going through right now, and we'd love to be a part of a conversation. We'd love to have you as a partner. So please just think about that as you move forward in your work. And again, just want to thank you You can do the next slide, I think, which is my last one. Dogoyak, that means thank you in Ute for the opportunity to be here. It's an honor to always be invited this and share this information and the story. And there's a time for any couple of questions. I'm happy to take any.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ernest, for this wonderful presentation. We have just a few minutes maybe for maybe one or two questions from the audience. If you would like to ask Ernest a question, you can either put it into the chat or use the Q&A feature down at the bottom. And then I will be happy to pass that along.
And maybe I answered all the questions.
You might have. You're just a very thorough presentation. You're getting some hearts from the crowd here. Ernest, ooh, this is a lovely question. I like this one. What gives you hope for the future?
That's a great question. Honestly, it's seeing the partnerships across the state that I've seen. Things like Indigenous film festivals in the Roaring Fork Valley or Aspen that's been inviting youth to come and to be able to bring their voice. I think what gives me hope on a national stage is seeing how much Indigenous voices are being heard now in multimedia efforts. I mean, as we've kind of seen that the Oscars, Lily Gladstone, being the first to be nominated for an Oscar as an Indigenous woman, Indigenous person in general. I mean, and just different types of authors. And there are more resources out there now and ability to share our story. If folks have not read the book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I would definitely encourage folks to do that. I know a lot of people have, but I think it's really important because it talks about another really key phrase, key term that's being thrown around a lot, which is traditional ecological knowledge, or TEIK, whatever we want to call it. But that all is building off partnerships. So that's one thing I would encourage folks to do. That gives me hope.
That's one of my absolute favorite books.
It's a good one.
Right. It's so good. All right. I'll take about one more question here. Do you have more best practices to share from a successful partnership on Indigenous related to climate? Sorry, let me read that one more time. Do you have more best practices to share from a successful partnership perspective on climate and a just transition in Colorado?
Yeah, so a project that I've been working with, or our team has since 2019, has been the city of Boulder. And in March 14th, the city of Boulder will be hosting about 16 tribes to sign an agreement around parks and open space to not only identify known and unknown sites, but to have protection of that. Obviously, as we know, the Marshall Fire completely changed a lot of things around the Front Range for fire adaptation and fire mitigation. Fire is really important to a lot of Indigenous groups. It's part of a lot of what we do and who we are. And this agreement, I think, will be one of the first in the state with as many tribes as they've had, but to also look at additional things like ethnographic reports that'll feed more interpretive signage, both at a curriculum level for education and youth groups, all the way to folks that are just looking on a regular Sunday or weekend hike, and so there's a lot of different variations there, but it also helped with the staff around adapting to the climate impacts here on the Front Range, not just by population growth that we're seeing, but also by including tribes and being a part of the table. I honestly don't know. I haven't seen very many examples of other local governments that have done as big of a lift as the city of Boulder has done and is about to, sign this massive agreement. And I think that it just shows that this can happen at a local level, which is hugely important.
Thank you so much. I'll do one last question. I know we're running a little bit behind on time, but there are several other ones that came in. It says, you mentioned that Ute Mountain people were green, quote, before green was a thing. How would you think about the importance of relationship to land to build stewardship?
Another great question. the there's a lot of conversations that are going on that I've been having over the last couple of years with the Nature Conservancy and Trust for Public Lands, for example. You know, not just nationally, but then also here for the state of Colorado. The Nature Conservancy just hired their tribal liaison for the state about 6 months ago. Nationally, the Trust for Public Lands just hired a national tribal liaison, Ken Lucero, out of New Mexico, again, just 6 to 8 months ago. So these other additional partners and allies, they're catching up to the conversation. So they can and should be an ally in this conversation around land management, around land access. A lot of times these are areas that tribes have never been to in years since removal, to be completely honest. And it's not always about that. Yes, there's an important connection to the land, but what about just getting youth groups out to these places to float a river, to go fishing, to go hunting? I mean, to do things that we've always been able to do. One thing that I've seen due to drought in southwestern Colorado is, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of our cottonwood trees due to the drought. And cottonwood trees are what we use for a lot of our ceremonies, and one in particular. And so now we've actually had to look at partnering with other land conservation groups to be able to replant cottonwoods, but then also go to seek other cottonwoods in areas that we haven't ever had to do since we're forced to be on that reservation. And that's actually broadening the conversation to other groups that I think you all could be a part of in your groups. And so if you have any of these areas, not just the historical component, but if you have any ties, and even if you're looking for history in your area, please reach out. History Colorado is a great resource. The Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs is a great resource. And of course, the 2 Ute tribes are always a great resource. I know that was it. Shell, thank you very much for the opportunity. Very honored to be here. Baboyak.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here, Ernest. There are several more questions in the chat if you feel called to get to them. But thank you again for being this year's keynote speaker. So with that, we will go ahead and we're going to turn it over to our new executive director, Maria DeCambra. She wants to take the opportunity to introduce herself to you all and to give some additional opening remarks. So Maria, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Ernest, for that presentation. It was so insightful. And I think, it's another reminder of that we must continue to do everything we can to make sure that we're including everyone in our state as we continue these resiliency conversations. I just want to take a moment to just welcome everyone and just say how excited we are to be hosting this again. A resilient state has been a longstanding priority and continues to be one. So, we hope that you enjoy the program that was put together. We think there's a lot of information. And ideally, you leave the summit today ready to continue to do even more work in your communities. But thank you all so much. I'm getting ready to go across the state starting here in the coming weeks. And I hope that I can meet many of you as I go through the various communities in our state. And I would love to, learn more about the work that you're doing on the ground. But thank you. And I'll turn it over back to, is it Anne? Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Maria. I'll go ahead and jump into the next section. So for the next part of our agenda, we wanted to share some examples from across Colorado where storytelling can mobilize action for climate adaptation. So I'll kind of introduce each of our speakers and then they'll follow one by one here. But first, we're honored to have our newest Colorado Poet Laureate represented at this year's summit, Andrea Gibson. While they could not be here in person today, they graciously shared a video that we will present shortly, performing their poem titled Homesick, A Plea for Our Planet. In addition to being our most recent Poet Laureate, Andrea has written 5 full-length collections of poetry. Their book, Lord of the Butterflies, was a winner of the Independent Publishers Award, as well as a Goodreads Choice Award finalist. In addition to their written work, Andrea has produced 7 full-length spoken word albums in collaboration with celebrated musicians. Their work strives to be a lifeline to the lonely, a megaphone in spaces of dangerous silence, and a permission slip to feel it all. Following Andrea's video, we're excited to have our next storyteller, Beth Osnes, who is a professor of theater and environmental studies at UC Boulder. who is active in applied performance and creative climate communication to co-author an equitable, survivable, and thrivable future for life and the ecosystems upon which life depends. She is the creator behind Shine, which you'll find out about here shortly, which is a performance for youth-led community engagement for resiliency planning, and we are so excited to learn more about this exciting opportunity. And finally, we will have our last storytellers, who are a dynamic musical duo. Destiny Hardney and Wayne Watts are co-founders of Dream, Create, Inspire Tour, or DCI Tour, which is an incubator of innovation, healing, and connection. They will provide a glimpse into their workshop that uses the healing power of music and collectivism to move us from a space of climate grief to a space of climate hope. So with that, we will now pull up Andrea's video to kick off this segment of our agenda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Gibson, and I am the current Poet Laureate of Colorado. And I'm excited to be with you today to talk about my favorite topic, which is the preciousness of our beautiful planet and how vital it is that we all be activating to care for our one and only home. I'm going to share a poem with you today called Homesick, a plea for our planet. And what's interesting about this poem is when I originally sat down to write it, I had just evacuated my home because of wildfires in Colorado. And I thought that I was going to write the most devastating poem. I thought it was going to be absolutely heartbreaking because for a lot of the writing I've done in my life, I've been motivated by the idea that even when the truth isn't hopeful, the telling of it is. Telling truths that might be devastating to hear is a really necessary. But what's interesting is this isn't a devastating poem. It ended up being a really celebratory poem that when I was writing it, I was really excited and falling further and further in love with our world, our planet. And I think about this often, like, what is it that inspires people to change? Like, what kind of art inspires people to change? And I do think that truthful, devastating art does. I think the truth inspires change almost always. But I also think that we as artists have a responsibility to imagine what the world could be and to acknowledge why our world is worth cherishing and standing up for. And so, and then I'll say one more thing. When I was young, I think I was about 23, I wrote a line to myself because so many of my poems at the time were so devastating. I wrote a line which was, "Everyone knows what you're against, Andrea. Show them what you're for." And so I think as artists and activists trying to create a more compassionate world, consistently reminding ourselves and each other what we are for is so important, because if we're looking out at a world and we're just seeing devastation, it can be easy to quit. It can be easy to lose faith. And I think a lot of our faith is born from reminding each other what is so wonderful about this place. And so hopefully this poem does a little bit of that. Homesick, a plea for our planet. In the 5th grade, I won the science fair with a project on climate change that featured a papier-mâché ozone layer with a giant hole through which a papier-mâché sun burned the skin of a Barbie in a bikini on a lawn chair, glaciers melting like ice cubes in her lemonade. It was 1987 in a town that could have invented the Republican Party, but the school principal gave me a gold ribbon and not a single bit of attitude about my radical political stance, because neither he nor I knew it was a political stance. Science had not yet been fully framed as leftist propaganda. I spent that summer, as I had every summer before, racing through the forest behind my house, down the path my father called the old logging road, to a meadow thick with raspberry bushes whose thorns were my very first heroes, because they did nothing with their life but protect what was sweet. Sundays, I went to church, but struggled to call it prayer if it didn't leave grass stains on my knees. Couldn't call it truth if it didn't come with a dare to crawl into the cave by the creek and stay there until somebody counted all the way to 100. As a kid, I thought 100 was the biggest number there was. My mother absolutely blew my mind the day she said 101. 100 and what? Billionaires never grow out of doing that same math with years, can't conceive of counting past their own lifespans, believe the world ends the day they do. Why are the keys to our future in the hands of those who have the longest commutes from their heads to their hearts, whose greed is the smog that keeps us from seeing our own nature in the sweetness we are here to protect? Do you know sometimes when gathering nectar, bees fall asleep in flowers? Do you know fish are so sensitive? Snowflakes sound like fireworks when they land on the water. Do you know sea otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart? Do you know whales will follow their injured friends to shore, often taking their own lives, so to not let their loved ones be alone when they die? None of this is poetry. It is just the earth being who she is, in spite of us stamping barcodes on the sea, in spite of us acting like Edison invented daylight. Dawn presses her blushing face to my window, asks me if I know the records in my record collection look like the insides of trees. Yes, I say, there is nothing you have ever grown that isn't music. You are the bamboo in Coltrane's saxophone reed, the mulberries that fed the silkworms that made the slippers for the ballet, the pine that built the loom that wove the hemp for Frida Kahlo's canvas, the roses that dyed her paint, hoping her brush might bleed for her body. Who more than the earth has bled for us? How do we not mold our hearts after the first spruce tree who raised her hand and begged to be cut into piano keys so the elephants could keep their tusks? The earth is the right side of history, is the canyon my friend ran to when no one else he knew would echo his chosen name back to him, is the wind that wailed through 1956 Alabama until the poplar trees carved themselves into Dr. King's pulpit, is the volcano that pours the mercury into the thermometers held under our tongues. The earth takes our temperature, tells us when we are too hot, even after we've spent decades claiming she is not, denying her fever. Our hands held to her burning forehead, we insist she is fine, while wildfires turn redwoods to toothpicks, readying the teeth of the apocalypse. She sends a smoke signal all the way from California to New York City. Ash falls from the sky. Do you know the mountains of California used to look like they'd been set on fire because they were so covered in monarch butterflies? Do you know monarch butterflies migrate 3,000 miles using only the fuel they stored as caterpillars in the cocoon? We need so much less than we take. We owe so much more than we give. Squirrels plant thousands of trees every year just from forgetting where they left their acorns. If we aimed to be just half as good as one of the earth's mistakes, we could turn so much around. Our living would be seed. The future would have roots. We would cast nothing from the garden of itself, and we would make the thorns proud. Thanks, everyone.
All right, Beth is up next.
Thank you, everyone. What a beautiful poem. Wow. Okay, I have unmuted, so I'm good, right?
You're good to go.
Okay, great. So I'm going to pull up a slide deck that I think until I share screen, I won't be able to, great. Welcome everyone. I'm excited to show you the musical Shine. This is coming out of Inside the Greenhouse, an initiative at the University of Colorado for creative climate communication. Shine at its heart is just a mini musical that is a mechanism for youth engagement with climate through performance. It started out when Boulder, Colorado, I think it was 2013, was one of the first cities to become one of the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities initiative. And I went to that first meeting. I was, not invited as a theater professor. Someone got me in, and I was there, and I think I was the only artist. And I also think that I was the only one there who really works with youth voices and ensuring that youth voices are part of the public conversation. So I left that meeting knowing what my work was. And so I created this musical. And I think before I talk about it, it's really good for you to just see it. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow our amazing tech person with this event to share the video, and then I'll claim back my spot.
My name is Delai, and I'm 11 years old. We made this timeline for the backdrop of the play. And then we have present day. It's kind of sad. A lot of carbon in the air.
Long time coming, a long time coming, long time coming, long time coming, long time coming, long time coming.
But then we have the future, which is happy if we can make it happy.
Overthread and understand. Over time we understand. Fibers will combine to be the fabric of community. Shine is a musical performance for youth community engagement in resilience planning. It weaves together climate science and artistic expression into a funny and powerful story. Shine spans 300 million years of geological time to convey how humanity, energy, and climate are interrelated. This combination of music, movement, and story stirs feelings about the values that bind our communities together. Rehearsing each part of the musical immerses youth in a lexicon surrounding climate, energy, and resilience.
Energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
It leads participants in embodying different aspects of climate science and human development that led us to the point where we are now. The first half of the show is scripted, composed, and choreographed to convey this story that has already been told by history. The second half is open to be authored by local youth to generate solutions for their city's resilient future. Shine celebrates this experience and unites both the audience and the performers to strengthen their resolve to act on their ideas.
Shine, shine, shine.
And I will share my screen again to get the slideshow back. Thank you so much for showing that. Okay, great. Thank you. So the performance of Shine, the first act, is the part that's been already written. It's already been composed, choreographed. There's a play that you can read, that you can use for it, and it tells the story that's already happened. How we have started out with the beautiful sun, the ancient plants and animals that die and get crushed by, tons of earth and sand and gravel to become fossil fuels. We see fossil fuel coming out there, FOSS. We're personifying these features. And then we have them going through geological time, kind of fast forwarding through geological time, the coming of the dinosaurs. We see these young people showing us. We also see this time where people were first, Homo sapiens were first learning to use fire, really beginning to use biomass, at which point Foss says, hey, what's that black stuff in the air? And they, oh, that's carbon in the air, but don't worry about it. It's just such a small amount. It won't matter. And then we see these folks who are living sustainably with the earth. And then we have Foss, who gets way more followers. And we come into the Industrial Revolution, this age where our rampant use of fossil fuels really fuels progress, which Foss says, you know, people seem to want it. You know, is progress always such a bad thing? But it comes at this cost. We start seeing then when they really take the stand in that lower corner where they're really going around the fabric of community that these young people have woven on the stage. They get through that, and then there's a storm that occurs, and it forces the Foss people to go off course, and they unintentionally rip through the fabric of community. And this gorgeous woven thing that you see on stage is destroyed. And one of the people who has done the least to cause it is on the ground, and people have been hurt. And the son comes to Foss, her younger brother, Fossil Fuels, and says, look what you've done. Like, what are we going to do now? And then one of the young people stands forward and says, that's the story that we've been handed. What is Act 2? What is the story that we want to tell in response to this legacy that we've been handed? And this is really where we have youth authored skits of local solutions. And this has been, so we do these local solutions. And of course, like many instances, many ceremonies, many public events, we end with a song, and a song has a function. It really, it reminds us of, it kind of cements in, it infuses the energy of the event into ourselves so that we're humming it when we leave. It gives that kind of feeling of completion. It gives that final feeling of kind of an emotional release of things that have been brought up. And this was something that I created as part of, here, I should move this over a little bit, as part of Inside the Greenhouse. And I had a lot of artistic collaborators. Tom Wassinger, local musician who's really quite accomplished. Tom Wassinger, Arthur Frederick, who works in New York City, working with young people through the National Dance Academy. And then scientific collaborators as well. Patty Romerolenko was just an incredible champion of getting us into the NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, to move the tables that literally they used to do the IPCC report some years, literally moving these tables so that we can put grapes and carrot sticks and rehearse a musical that we then performed for the scientists at NCAR, that inversion of powerful places and inversion of who is the expert handing over information to the scientists. And then Joshua Sperling, who's a great champion of this work as well. And they didn't just champion it, they got in there and performed with the young people. This is an example of applied performance. Applied performance is where you have non-performers, non-traditional spaces. Process is just as important as the product. It's based on social issues, and the entire performance is designed to engage. You can see that the audience is engaged with it as well, and that they have this kind of infused feeling from the young people. Our learning goals from this were to really have them understand that relationship between energy, climate, and human development, and kind of human responsibility and opportunities now. And this approach is grounded in the science, but it's expressed through the arts, focusing on their young solutions. It includes embodied learning and students as the authors of knowledge and partners in displaying it. And yes, it's silly, but silly is actually a very productive state to be in, having fun and being silly. This performance has been able to tour around the world as part of the 100 Resilient Cities initiative. I wrote a book about it, taking all the stories of all these places and finding the advice and the wisdom that came from all these. But the main thing is that there are now open source materials. Open source means free. There's a website that you can go to on Inside the Greenhouse that just has everything you need to put on the show. The scripts, the music, open source music with the lyrics, with us singing with it, without us singing with it. The choreography, if you want to use that. Lesson plans, properties, costumes, you can borrow them from me. They're in my basement. I had a company in Colorado Springs, Dragon Theater, that's an all abilities company, come and yeah, use this stuff for my basement. Kids love costumes. Please approach me with any kind of advice, encouragement, ideas that you would like. I'm happy to help you do this. This was tried with a school in Jeffco in Golden. So we did it with a classroom of fourth grade. It's really fourth, fifth grade, but it can be done in high schools as well. But it's really ready for any theater teachers or any science teachers or anybody who really wants to guide their young people in activating climate solutions. We also realized that when we did this, young people were doing all these amazing idea solutions around picking up trash, which isn't really a climate solution. It's more aesthetic. So we're like, kids need access to top climate solutions. So we partnered with Project Drawdown to make their solutions really accessible and featuring kids. So we took all 83 solutions that Project Drawdown did, and we have this source that is available so that kids can have access to top climate solutions. And Phaedra was her and her son were some of the peer reviewers. We had fifth grade peer reviewers, which we're very proud of. And you can go to enactingclimate.org for this access to the curriculum and to the solutions. And I think I'm out of time there, so I'm going to stop there. But if you want to experience any of this kind of work that's happening now at the Butterfly Pavilion in Westminster, I'll be doing a show called The Butterfly Affect this Saturday, 9 o'clock until 3 o'clock. If anybody wants to sign up or learn more about it, it's an opportunity to metamorphose as a butterfly. But I think that concludes my arts-based sharing of how that can really make a difference with including youth voices. And please feel free to contact me. I have the resources listed in the packet that comes with this presentation. So please share the word that this is a tool available to everyone, open source for youth engagement. Thank you so much. 10 goes by fast.
So much for that, Beth. Your work is beautiful and we're so grateful to go after you because I feel like there's so much alignment with what we do at Dream Create Inspire Tour with youth, but also intergenerational. So grateful for your stories and for the work you're doing in the community. And hello, everyone. My name is Destiny Hardney. I'm a co-founder of an organization called Dream Create Inspire Tour, also known as DCI Tour. And we're an organization that really specializes in songwriting workshops as well as community events that are rooted in collective healing and liberation. And I'm going to pass it to my co-founder to introduce himself as well.
Check one, check two. We live. What's up, y'all? My name is Wayne Watts, co-founder of Dream Create Inspire Tour. We're super excited to work with you guys and cook up a song in this amount of time.
Yeah, so today in our session, we're actually going to give you all a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be in a DCI Tour workshop. And the song that we're going to actually create will be in addition to a song that we started in a climate workshop a few months ago. So we all are giving you an opportunity to be songwriters today. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to invite you to put your thoughts and your feelings in the chat throughout this time period. So anything that comes to mind for you, put it in the chat. And Wayne is going to be really checking the chat. And you see he's in the studio right now. So it looks like a fake studio, but he's actually in the studio right now. And he's going to be recording live while we have a conversation. And at the end of our session, we'll be able to listen back to the song and even meditate with it if that's what you all feel like doing. And you'll be able to kind of see that the way that we utilize music in spaces around social justice to create a tool that can be used for us collectively in this space, but also as we go on our journeys and are doing our own things. So I'm going to share my screen. And as I do that, I invite you all just to get comfortable wherever you are. And that could be sitting in your chair. That could be laying down if you want to. That could be standing up and moving around if you feel like you need to move your body. Do whatever feels best for you right now in this moment. And as you get to your comfortable space, I invite you to just breathe at your own pace. I don't want you to manipulate your breath, change it at all. Just breathe normally and just kind of pay attention to your breath. If you want, you can maybe put your hand on your chest or on your stomach. Notice the tempo of it. Notice the feel of the breath entering your lungs and exiting your lungs. And as we move through this session, I want you to always remember to come back to your breath and always come back and notice what that breathing pattern is like. Now, I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to just close your eyes. If you don't want to close your eyes, just maybe find a point to just kind of focus your attention on. And the first thing I want you to do is to pay attention to what you can hear. In addition to my voice, are there any sounds around you that are standing out to you? Anything that sounds beautiful to you? Anything that might be distracting you? Just notice. Now I want you to bring your attention to your tongue. Maybe move it around in your mouth a little bit and try to describe for yourself what taste is lingering there. It could be a pleasant taste. Are you chewing gum? Are you eating? Is there something from earlier today still there? And now bring your attention to your nose. So take a deep breath in through your nose and try to name any smells that you can smell right now, anything that stands out for you. Now I want us to bring our attention to our hands and think about and really try to name any sensations you can feel. So if you're holding something, is it hard? Is it soft? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Do you feel warmth in your hands? Do you feel coldness? You can touch something that's in front of you, maybe feel your legs, and just really try to name that sensation for yourself. Now, if your eyes are closed, I want you to open them and just look around the space that you're in and notice anything that stands out to you, anything that catches your eye. Now, as we move through a couple of questions, this is the time to really start putting all of your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings into the chat. I want you to remember these senses that we just kind of tapped into in the present. And as I ask questions, it might ask you something about something to reflect on. Try to do it with all 5 of your senses, okay? So this first question I want you to reflect on is, when do you feel most hopeful? And as you think about that question, you think about the word hopeful. Think about, what does it smell like when you're hopeful? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And when you think about feel, you can think about it physically, like we just talked about, but also emotionally. What does it feel like when you are hopeful? And as you think through those, and as you put things into the chat, remember to breathe. And I'm going to move to the next question, but feel free to keep putting your thoughts and your feelings in the chat. So I want us to think about our relationship to the world, especially when we're talking about climate and climate adaptation and moving from grief to hope. If you get to imagine the world that you want, it could be your wildest dreams, but they become reality. What does the world look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? And when I say wildest dream, it doesn't have to look anything like this world looks right now. It could look like something from a sci-fi movie. It could look like something you just thought of yourself. It could look like something that your toddler described to you. Your wildest dream becomes reality. What does this world look like? Now, while you all are thinking about this, imagining this, Wayne is over there in the studio. You can kind of see him putting some of your words into the song. And part of what we're doing, of course, is creating music. And one question that we have for you all that we would love to see the answer for in the chat is what soundscape you would like for your song. So we have 3 options today for the soundscape. So when we think about your world, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? Does it sound kind of like outer space? Would you describe it as interdimensional? Or would you like it to be calling into the past? So put your vote in the chat now, and Wayne will make sure to include that in our song. So the last question that I have for us that I really want us to take some time to think about and take some time to reflect on, take some time to meditate on is how can harnessing our collective power lead to significant and sustainable changes for the world? And when I ask that question, I want you to consider what is your superpower or what are your superpowers? And what are you really great at that will contribute to changing the world? And who else do you need in your corner? Who do you need that's going to balance you out? Who do you need that has the strengths that you don't have? Who do you need that has the talents that you don't have? And how do we come together to improve the world that we want? So as you all are putting any thoughts, any feelings in the chat, feel free also to close your eyes again and really imagine this. Imagine the world that you've decided you want to create. Imagine who you're bringing along with you. Imagine who you need. Imagine what you need. And don't forget to think about what all of that looks like, what all of that sounds like, what all of that tastes like, what all of that smells like, and with your whole body, what all of that feels like. So I want us to take a moment and just breathe together again at your own pace and pay attention to whether or not your breath feels the same as it did when we started. Is the tempo the same? Did it increase? Did it decrease? Are you noticing something about your breath a little bit more, a little bit less? How comfortable do you feel in your breath right now? And as we think about how we're feeling, but as we think about our breath and as we feel our breath, we're going to start to transition into our listening session. And as we transition into the listening session, I want you to remember to breathe. I want you to remember to listen to the song that we just created together with your entire body. So if you feel a sensation coming out of your heart space, pay attention to why. Try to think about why. If you feel some excitement in your hands, if you feel like you need to move your body, do whatever feels good to you in this space. And I'm going to pass it over to Wayne to kind of share with us what your words and your thoughts and feelings just helped us create.
Check 1, check 2, we live. Oh man, such amazing, incredible words that you guys put. So I'm going to share what we have so far. Let me see. Give me 1 second. And what's great about this is that everything you guys did was interconnected. So we started from the beginning of everyone talking. So this is what we got so far. Ready? Here we go. Chief in my bloodline, I sit at the heart of it. Since time immemorial, we've been a part of it. I fly like a butterfly shining in Boulder. My energy can never be destroyed, I told you. Collaboration happens at the speed of trust. 150 trials, so you need is us singing. I am one with all things. I am one with all things. I am one with all things. I our planet, full partnership with our planet. I'm in full partnership with our planet, full partnership with our planet. The strings of my heart are in tune with the universe, the universe. The strings of my heart are in tune with the universe, the universe. Clear, majestic, burst of color, the freshest, pressure, sunlight, plants, feel right. Species thriving together, the species are thriving together. Species thriving together, the species thriving together. Species thriving together, the species thriving together. The species thriving together, the species are thriving together. Yeah. Hello? I'm calling to the future. I think we'll be okay.
And give yourselves a round of applause too, because those are your thoughts, those are your words, those are your feelings, and amazing, amazing, amazing contributions that helped us create that song. So thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your energy. I just want to leave us with one quote from my favorite author, Octavia Butler, something that always resonates with me in these kind of spaces. And it is, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The everlasting truth is change. Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Super great. I think it's a hit song. Don't you think we should release it?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Destiny and Wayne and Beth. And we will also give a thank you to Andrea for their inspiring words for this segment. I wish we could just continue this on for the rest of the session today. Patrick, if we can go ahead and spotlight Destiny, Wayne, and Beth. We have just a few minutes. I hope everyone's okay with this. I'm going to do a little bit of shifting of the agenda here. In that we do have a break scheduled right now, but because I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask all of our speakers some really great questions, I hope we're okay if we just move through the break, do some questions, and we'll move into our next section. So if you have questions for Beth, Destiny, or Wayne, please put them in the chat now, and we'll take maybe 2 or 3, seeing how much time we have here before we move into our next segment. So are there any questions? You're getting a ton of great comments in the chat. I hope you both are looking at that. Any question? Oh, first question. It's the same question we got earlier, but I think it's a good one. What gives you all hope for the future? Maybe we'll start with Beth and then Destiny and Wayne if you want to follow.
Great. I think it's funny because people will think that like, oh, maybe you work with young people because you're nice, and I just feel like I just work with young people because they're more interesting and they're not afraid of change. They're willing to play. So I think finding people who are willing to play, who are willing to try new things and aren't afraid of change, that's what gives me hope.
First, Wayne.
Oh, I can go. Yeah, I'll say what gives me hope is calls like this, because like I think the intersectionality of different departments collaborating over one or multiple issues, you get a chance to see it from so many different perspectives and views. So I would say that we all bring our own perspectives to it and we get a chance to actually fix it for real. So that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, and I would kind of tag on to what Beth was speaking about, and I'm in here in my living room and I'm hearing my daughter in the other room singing, and I think about being with youth and being in a space where there's so much imagination that happens that we sometimes forget about as adults, and we get reminded. So those reminders when I'm with the kids, when I'm with the babies, really give me a lot of hope, but also just being in spaces where conversations are happening that people don't want to keep trying the same thing over and over, but want to try something different and want to change it and say like, okay, this part isn't working or this part is working. So what do we keep and what do we let go? And building a community of people that want to do that work no matter what.
Such inspiring answers. Thank you. Our next question. So Beth showed us how to reach out and get more participation. And then the other question is, Destiny and Wayne, how do you bring your workshops to a place if folks are interested?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to go to our website, which is dcitour.com. We'll put it in the chat as well. But definitely just send us a message and we can absolutely figure out how to bring a workshop to you. We are right now really focusing on kind of touring the state. So we're taking our workshops all around the state of Colorado. We started as a tour, that's why that's in our name. So if you want to be a part of the tour, just reach out to us and we'll definitely figure something out.
Wonderful. And that's a great reminder too. Following this event, we will be sharing takeaway materials. So we'll make sure that you all know how to reach out to Beth, Destiny, and Wayne. We'll make sure you have all that information. Next question is kind of a technical one, but for Wayne, they would love to learn more about the software you use to create the songs and if you offer this for other events.
We absolutely do. So we use a bunch of different softwares. One of them I recommend the Soundtrap. We do that with our artists. We bring in actually different musicians who teach different things, whether it be Ableton Live or Fruity Loops. So feel free, definitely reach out to us. We're able to do portable pop-ups as well too, and virtual ones, as you can see we just did today.
Amazing. And we've got one question left. This one's for Beth. What is the pulse you get from youth on how they can address the climate crisis? Do you get fear, anxiety, hope, resilience? What kind of feelings do you get?
I think once you go to youth with the assumption that they have something to offer and that they are, valid producers of ideas and perspectives and information, that then they pretty quickly feel the hope of. They also feel like the vibe I get too is like, it's a little bit like we all had a party and then we didn't clean up. And then the next morning we say to them, I've got a great opportunity for you. You could be a party cleaner upper. There's a little bit of like and they want to hear that we're not done. They want to hear that we're still there shoulder to shoulder with them doing this work. And I think that the intergenerational and then creating situations in which kind of every generation, peer to near peer, is present and doing the work together makes for really deep and exciting and vibrant and informed and grounded work.
Incredible. Well, thank you, each of you, for helping us kind of shake up how we do virtual conferences and just being such a great example of how we can bring art and governmental entities together to create just absolute magic. I knew this was going to be the case, but it's just so validating to just feel so inspired and energized and excited and hopeful. Oftentimes when we get into conversations on climate, there's a lot of grief, and I'm not feeling that right now. So thank you. We hope you'll be able to see you in the future, and thank you again. All right, so we will go ahead. We're going to move through our break and just go ahead and move into our next segment just to help us stay on time here. So while this event is an opportunity for us to kind of highlight the great things that are happening across the state, we also wanted to showcase what our state of Colorado is working on in the climate adaptation space. So to provide this overview, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Miller, our Colorado Resiliency Office Director, as well as the Governor's Office of Climate Preparedness and Disaster Recovery, which is a more newly stood up office. And we have the director of that office, Jonathan Asher, to give us kind of a comprehensive overview of the action that's happening at the state level. So Ann and Jonathan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I am feeling a lot of energy. Thank you so much to all the presenters that have gone before us and the ones to come here. So I'm also feeling hopeful about the progress that the state of Colorado has made over the last several years, but in particular, I want to highlight our 2023 annual progress report, just released earlier this year, and this highlights our progress on our Colorado Resiliency Framework strategies. This is an interagency effort, so you'll see like so many great successes and progress happening across the state in all of our different areas, from ag to housing to natural resources, et cetera. So this is I want to congratulate all of our partners across state agencies for making that work happen, and for all our partners. So addressing climate impacts cannot happen in a silo, of course, and requires collaboration. So I'm really excited that, Jonathan's here to share some highlights of the new capacity that we've got with his office. So Jonathan, turn it over to you for some highlights.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Anne. And I appreciate joining, and it's been just such a wonderful conversation so far. So really, really great to have this put together, and thanks for facilitating it. I appreciate the opportunity. For folks that don't know, the Governor's Office of Climate Preparedness and Disaster Recovery was created in SB 22206, which was really largely a kind of Marshall Fire response package that included a lot of different elements, from policy elements to recovery and funding programs, and many other key parts. And really the impetus was, as we were investing heavily in the recovery from, the state's, most kind of human impact and built environment impact disaster, we should be growing the state's capacity and focus on climate preparedness and adaptation, to, recognize and understand and prepare for the fact that the changing climate is only going to, make us more vulnerable to similar and larger scale disasters. And so really it's, kind of, a pound of prevention is worth, or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of thought process. And in standing up our office, SB 22206 tasked us with really doing a deep dive into climate adaptation in the state, and also a roadmap for next step action items for the next steps that we're going to take to be on that prepared track. And we rolled that out December 1st, and just had a really amazing experience putting it together, conducting really the first, kind of in-depth science-driven and modeling focused effort, a climate risk analysis or a climate risk assessment that a lot of even Fortune 500 companies are now doing to understand future climate scenario risk to their assets. We did a similar exercise to understand, to the best of our ability, bringing in many other factors like vulnerable communities, like natural systems, like our elevation and topography, like economic and socioeconomic factors, to have as kind of well-rounded of an understanding of future potential climate scenarios and impacts to the state as we could. And so taking that climate risk assessment, worked across state agencies to then develop really, detailed, actionable next step action items. And I think that was a driving goal and force of ours, was looking at the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap that the Colorado Energy Office produces. It's something that is so detailed and very actionable. With being actionable means, it is something that we can move forward and shows clear progress. So we really took a note from that process to have a similar outcome with our roadmap. And with that, the state is now really going to be doing that kind of deep dive into next steps on climate adaptation efforts, preparedness efforts across agencies. This includes, a number of key focus areas, overlaying, what we saw from the science and data with what are we already doing. So we're not recreating, reinventing the wheel. But at the same time, understanding to some degree where and how do we start to kind of prioritize given the large scope that that climate adaptation can take on. So, that includes looking at our natural systems and biodiversity, looking at, wildfire, which continues to be a key need, drought continues to be a key need, impacts to disproportionately impacted communities, and environmental justice, and a number of other kind of key areas. And really with that, what we hope to do, being situated in the governor's office is one, have easy ability to work across agencies and really drive action across agencies, but also being naturally situated to engage with our federal delegation, with federal agencies, with the White House and others where we regularly interact with kind of our federal partners in the governor's office, but then also being able to be naturally situated with the annual kind of budget development process, legislative development process, and the legislative session, and being able to kind of see all the things that are kind of flowing in across agencies. So we're excited to add this capacity and just really excited to have such critical partners with the Colorado Resilience Office and really excited to continue to forge that partnership. And I think we've already done a bunch of exciting things, and I think there's just so much more on the horizon. So that's what gives me hope. I tried to jump the question and get ahead of it. And with that, Ian, I'll just turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're excited for the work ahead with you and so many others here. So a couple of quick highlights before we move it to the breakout sessions. We have been so active. I will just highlight a few other things from 2013. State agencies were holding listening sessions across the state to understand local communities' concerns about the changing climate and its impacts, and really giving feedback to the state on what do we need to do, what's our role. And that's going to help update the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap that will be released here in the coming months. So there's that work happening. We're constantly supporting communities so they can access historic amounts of funding, and we're holding monthly local government coordination calls and webinars featuring funding opportunities. So lots of good stuff. We launched a new Climate Resilience Challenge Fund opportunity for local governments to really think big about how to take those bold actions locally to have an impact in your communities. I'll talk more about that at the end and how you can find out more. We will be updating our Colorado Resiliency Framework in 2025. So we will start reaching out and letting you know about opportunities to help shape the update of our action plan for where we go from here. Also, just a good reminder that the state released and put together one Colorado Climate Action website. So it's meant to be a clearinghouse where you can go to find out, okay, what are all the different departments doing? Where do I go for information, action, resources? How do I get involved? So you'll see the link in the chat. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shale and our breakout sessions.
Great, thank you so much. So we are going to go ahead and move into the breakout sessions. So just some quick instructions on these. We will have 2 breakout sessions. For the breakout sessions to work, unfortunately, we can only have Spanish interpretation in one of them. So we will have a single breakout room that folks can utilize, and that will be for session 2, which is really looking at finding common ground through storytelling. The session 1 will remain in this main room. So when I open the breakout room, which I'll do shortly here, if you want to go to breakout session 2, you would select that breakout. Otherwise, if you want to look at breakout session 1, you'll just stay in this room and you don't have to do anything. So I will just quickly kind of go over each of the breakout sessions. So breakout session, excuse me, 1 is Beyond Data, Telling Your Community Story with Multimedia, People, and Places. We have Evan Barrientos and Dr. Phaedra Pizzulo, who are going to be the panelists on that session. And this session is really looking at, no matter who your audience is, it all comes back to telling your story. And your community's needs and opportunities. And so there's a lot of really great examples of interesting technologies, tools, and resources for storytelling. And this session is going to really highlight those, as well as some creative storytelling approaches that show some specific climate adaptation issues that have been happening here in Colorado, including social and natural resource impacts. We'll also be referencing how equity is related to data and can help tell this story. And how the use of multimedia and qualitative approaches can be used to make your story more complete. The second breakout session, which again, if this is the session you want to go to, you will select that breakout room, is Finding Common Ground through Storytelling. So I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this in this space, but there's quite a diversity in perspectives as it relates to climate issues. But it's all important. It's extremely important for us to recognize that we all share a common planet and future. So stories can be used to help us to find common ground and motivate and mobilize us towards a common understanding and common objectives. So this breakout's going to feature personal stories, experiences, challenges, and real-world examples where storytelling has actually helped to facilitate the achievement of climate adaptation goals and foster sustainable action. So with that, I will go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. Again, if you want to stay, if you want to look at session 1, you'll stay in this room. If you want to go to session 2, you'll go to the breakout room. You will be getting some more additional instructions from your facilitators when you move into there. But one thing I do want to remind folks is that this is being recorded. So please be mindful of that. We do want to open up to share perspectives and opinions, but just keep in mind to be mindful and considerate. And then you can use the chat as you have earlier to ask questions. In the breakout sessions, we will have an opportunity for some discussion. If you want to express yourself verbally, you can do so by raising your hand using the raise hand feature, and one of the facilitators will call upon you to ask your question or provide feedback. Otherwise, you're welcome to continue using the chat as we have been. So with that, I will go ahead and open up the breakout room. And you should have that option come up in front of you, and you are able to select which room you would like to go to.
Awesome. Well, I am going to just jump right into breakout room 1. So thank you all for sticking around, and we are going to go beyond data. So just as a reminder, with the breakout rooms, we are now able to have a little bit more discussion. So we'll have an opportunity for questions after each speaker. So feel free to drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A as we go. And you're also welcome when we do have Q&A to raise your hand, and we can either unmute you or have you unmute yourselves. So with that, Shale gave a great introduction for our breakout today, but we are going to reference some data and sort of how that quantitative approach to storytelling can work, but also how we can make a more complete story with qualitative approaches. I'm really excited to hear more from our 2 panelists, Phaedra and Evan. Before I reintroduce Phaedra and pass it off to her, I'm going to talk and provide a little bit more background on some equity-related data and work that the state has been doing, which relates to some of the work that Phaedra has been doing. So here in the state of Colorado, we launched in 2021 an Environmental Justice Action Task Force. So if you're not familiar, this task force was mandated by Governor Polis through the Colorado Environmental Justice Act. And they already have released a 50-page report with recommendations to the governor on how we can do environmental justice work in the state. And that report came out with a number of outcomes, the 4th of which listed here was to define disproportionately impacted communities. And this is happening not just here in Colorado, but all over the country and also federally. You may be aware of Justice 40 and the CJUST tool, which defines federally what a disproportionately impacted community is. But here in Colorado, we have now our own definition in the state, which has now been mapped so that we can see exactly where these communities who have been disproportionately impacted fall. And so that is the Colorado EnviroScreen tool that's pictured here. And you can see that that definition of disproportionately impacted community includes low income and people of color and housing cost burdened and so on. And we also map Justice 40. So this Colorado EnviroScreen tool is the really quantitative way that we define disproportionately impacted. But we also know that our stories within these communities run much deeper than this. And so with that, I do just want to provide one example as to how having this mapping tool can help us to make sure funding is going to these communities. And so the Microgrids for Community Resilience program is a program that we oversee here at the Colorado Resiliency Office. And within our application, we ask applicants to quantitatively refer to social vulnerabilities, including this map of the EnviroScreen disproportionately impacted communities or Justice 40 or other data, as well as some other quantitative measures of climate risks and vulnerabilities or infrastructure vulnerabilities. But within our application, we also ask for qualitative, tell the story of why your community is vulnerable and what a microgrid would do to change that. So hopefully that gives a little bit more of an example as to how this EnviroScreen tool is being used and how we can go beyond quantitative into qualitative storytelling for things like getting funding to our communities. So with that, I'm going to be passing it off to Phaedra. She is a professor at CU Boulder, as well as the co-director of the Center for Creative Climate Communication and Behavior Change, or C3BC, and the Just Transition Collaborative. She's an esteemed author, podcaster, and doctor. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Phaedra.
Thank you for inviting me to join today and to everyone for showing up. I wanted to share a slide I have shared at every talk since the height of the pandemic in 2020 to recognize that even though we're no longer at the height, it takes a lot in these politically and ecologically stressful times to show up for events like this. For those of you I have not yet met, I'm an associate professor in the College of Media, Communication, and Information at the University of Colorado Boulder. My research focuses on environmental and climate justice, as well as environmental communication, including co-authoring a textbook on the subject, which is going into its 7th edition now, editing books and journals, authoring scholarly books, and a podcast called Communicating Care, with advocates around the world making a difference. I don't have time to cover all my experiences since the early 1990s on the environmental justice movement, but folks can follow up if you're interested. So given that brief introduction, I wanted to ask now, what are the rhetorical constraints of quantitative environmental justice analysis? Marguerite already helpfully contextualized why EnviroScreen can be useful in Colorado for those of us invested in improving environmental and public health. This slide summarizes some of the possibilities and limitations. While quantitative tools can promote transparency, make patterns come to light, foster awareness, increase accountability and standardization, and ideally prompt to action, reducing all life to numbers and only in digital formats also can be alienating and mystifying for the people such tools are designed to help. As environmental and climate justice advocates repeatedly have noted, data alone is insufficient for the justice communities need and deserve. Another assumption that drives what I'm going to share today is to counter the myth of the deficit model of communication. That it is not just some people need more information. There are plenty who have been informed and choose to ignore data or find the data doesn't resonate with their lived experiences. So one-way communication, or this deficit model of communication, might be vital in emergencies to alert people to something happening in an acute risk or other specific contexts, but it's not sufficient for building resilience, where we need to imagine communication more as a back and forth dialogue or process of engagement. To hear how communities have deep knowledge and investment about where they live requires listening to and telling stories. Stories vary, of course, but every culture has traditions of storytelling that matter to understanding values and practices. Knowing this, we might ask, how do we tell stories about living together justly, mutually, and sustainably on a damaged planet? The project I'm briefly sharing with you today is a form of digital storytelling. For this project, we understand digital storytelling as an affective multimedia communication technology created to share and to constitute meaning as well as feelings in the public sphere. That definition might be a mouthful, but it clarifies that the goal is emotional, social, symbolic, and ideally consequential in public life. Our approach aims to encourage the three public functions of digital environmental media more broadly: to alert broader publics, to amplify a particular crisis or advocacy, and to engage more people. And of course, just like quantitative data, not all stories are empowering. Consider, for example, the headlines we've all seen about a Denver zip code being, quote, the dirtiest in the country. While those stories may create shock and buzz for those that don't live there, how do headlines land on the community itself? In our rush to establish criteria of harm, are we empowering the same communities we want to be advocating for and with, or are we further stigmatizing and alienating them? Another way stories can become toxic is that some communities have what we call narrative fatigue. Some cities, towns, and neighborhoods in Colorado are used to outsiders and government officials coming in and asking for their stories. Before going to a community for public engagement, then, it's vital to learn what already has been shared, to listen to the radio interviews, oral histories, and more, or as I say to my students, do your homework. We live in an age of a content flood. So one thing we can do to support overburdened communities is gather what stories already exist instead of just asking questions that have been answered and sometimes can be re-traumatizing to share. One size does not fit all then, as each culture and topic warrant different engagement plans. Some stories have not been told at all, and some stories have been told frequently. As our keynote speaker Ernest House Jr. underscored, collaboration happens at the speed of trust. And of course, that varies depending on what department and what community we're talking about. Finally, as the last contextual point I want to offer before getting to the project is Indigenous scholar Eve Tuck's call not just for damage-centered, but also desired-centered research. Too often, we focus on the disproportionate impact or what's wrong. While this is vital to fostering sustainability for resilience, we need to consider why communities live and work where they do. Who do they care about? And what do they adore or value in their communities? Given the odds, what gets them and us out of bed in the morning and ready to try again? To place these assumptions into practice, in spring 2022, I taught the foundational course at CU Boulder for our graduate certificate in environmental justice for the first time. To prepare, I reached out to Joel Miner, who had just become the EJ program manager at CDPHE in 2021. And I asked him if he had a qualitative component to the EnviroScreen plan, which Marguerite just talked about. He did not, but Joel was very open to working with my class for a pilot project. Eventually, the research and policy analyst Rani Kumar also joined my conversations with CDPHE to offer her expertise as well. The students could opt in this project or out. They came from a range of disciplines, including Wen Lee and Anthony Albadraz from journalism, Warren Cook from communication, Jana Patel from law, Sam Collier from performance studies, an advisee of my friend Beth Osnes, who spoke at this conference earlier today, and 3 from the Masters of the Environment program, Sarah Enzor, Daniel Ferrucci, and Cheyenne Foots. I was incredibly lucky to work with this group on this pilot project as we were coming out of the height of the pandemic and we were working in a very short time frame. In dialogue with Joel, we guessed the 6 communities that the EJ screen would consider the worst before all the quantitative measurements were done, and we ended up being correct about 5. The 5th I had guessed, so you don't have to spend this whole time thinking about, or the 6th I had guessed, was Greeley, which faces an acute situation related to fracking and environmental racism, but doesn't register as significant statistically on EnviroScreen in the same ways that the other communities did. So the 5 stories that we developed were about San Luis Valley, Lower Arkansas River Valley, Pueblo County, North Denver, and the Ute Mountain Ute tribal lands, which just was approved this past week and should be up on the website soon. Again, we didn't put up stories without the consent of the people most directly involved in them. We chose ArcGIS story maps as a tool or format for the stories, as my campus at CU Boulder and CDPHE both have access to the platform. Students were paired up with a list of names from Joel of community members, and in addition to gathering information about what already existed, took photographs and conducted at least 2 interviews at each site. The goal was not to create profiles or portraits of individual people, but to compile stories of places. Why do people choose to live, work, and play in these communities? What do residents believe are the greatest strengths of their community? And how could those strengths be used to improve environmental and climate justice? How do residents define environmental crises where they live? Who is most impacted by environmental injustices in their community? And how could the state of Colorado address or remedy it? Since I don't have much time, I want to shift my screen to one story map so you can see the interactivity of the site. So this is the San Luis Valley story, and I'm choosing this because it was highlighted in the report on resiliency this past year. And you can see we start off with images and background from the banner. And across the banner, there's a series of tabs that people could jump to a specific section or just scroll down. You can find maps and images, each involving words and audio clips and visuals. And this one, of course, starts with the recreation area and agricultural while ending on water and climate concerns. So I want to start off with one short clip. I'm just going to share 2 so that you can hear some of the interactivity and some of the voices from the community.
So I'm a 6th-generation farmer. My family came here in the 1850s maybe. The first family came in from New Mexico back in, like, the history is that it was part of Mexico. Mexico opened it up for settlers, and so a lot of Hispanic settlers came, and my family is one of those families. And so, of course, there's like a very long history here of, like, you know, the generations and the great-grandparents and the great-great-great-great-grand, you know, however many greats, farming the land, being ranchers, having sheep, all that sort of stuff. So I feel like there's definitely like this long, beautiful story of my family moving up through northern New Mexico into Colorado, and then homesteading here and running their businesses here.
In addition to short audio clips of the history and the background and the maps, I want to share one second clip in my short time today that towards the end gets a little bit more at questions of resiliency.
The San Valley for many years was the place you drove through to get somewhere else, you know. And I lived for quite a long time in Pagosa Springs, and so have to come through the valley. And then started to get to know a couple people here and had the chance to get off the highway and see some of the more hidden places. And I, by that time, was involved in land management and land conservation. And then a woman I knew from skiing at Wolf Creek was starting a land trust here in the valley. And I was on the land trust board in Pagosa. And so I got to know it more. I just, oh my gosh, this place is just like I hadn't discovered it. It hadn't been discovered. And it was, as far as from a conservation standpoint, such an extraordinary place of working lands, public lands, wildlife habitat, and then the community of people that, you know, so many multi-generational farmers and ranchers here who really, as I started helping the land trust get started and going to water meetings to learn about it, just watching people showing up all the time for meetings and really doing the work to take care of this place. It really touched me because that's what it's going to take everywhere is people who love their place, doing what it takes.
And so what I appreciate most about that clip again is how she emphasizes the importance of the work of resiliency, which means showing up for meetings like this, and showing up in the places we love and trying to build a better future for all. And that's an image also of Anthony Albatres, who is a journalist who did the final edits on virtually all of the story maps, and I'll put his website in the last slide once again. So since my time is up, I'll just note there are community members who can help facilitate outreach meetings and solutions in every community. To name just three, one is Anthony, and his website again is at the top of the site. If you would like to talk to a consultant who can work remotely on story maps. In Boulder County last night, I was working with Once and Future Green, a local BIPOC-led group that we have here in Colorado. That's a consulting collective. And finally, my class did end up publishing an article on this pilot project if you want to read more about the possibilities and limitations of our work. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
I haven't seen any questions yet, but yeah, Patrick or I could help field questions if you want to drop it in the Q&A anonymously or in the chat. Otherwise, if not seeing any right now, I think I might, oh, here we go. I'll read this question out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Don Cameron from the city of Golden asked, do you know or have data to show that qualitative data is showing ability to change hearts and minds, or is it really about education and uptake of information more effectively? Sadly, there's plenty of data to say quantitative data is making little change in people's view on, for example, the climate.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think you know that. So that will be our big winning question. I mean, data does change minds. I think that Margaret was really trying to lay out carefully how, for example, we can leverage federal funding. One of the reasons I went into the university is because I realized me and three of my friends can't clean up a toxic landfill by ourselves. We need the resources that these larger grants provide to clean up water in certain areas in the state, to address climate, to support mitigation projects. And so I definitely want to make sure that I'm not slamming data, but of course, as you point out, there are limitations to it, right? So it's not just, oh, I shared it, why doesn't everybody believe me? So I've done trainings for scientists up at UCAR and, you know, they get frustrated. Why don't people just believe me? And I'm like, well, have you met most people's high school science teacher? Some people loved them. It was their favorite teacher. And some people, that was their least favorite class. And that, you know, really represents things afterwards. So, yes, there are lots of different stories that are qualitative. I hate to draw back on quantitative to prove the qualitative works, that say, it does do the work that our keynote said, which is key, which is building trust. We're not going to have resiliency just counting parts per million. We're not going to have resiliency just based on counting who has had the most wildfire damage economically. The way we have to build resiliency, and I think so many people that are wonderful here today have been doing it, is working with our communities. And we don't know all of each other, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to do things like this where I'm like, oh, this is so incomplete, like it's just the beginning. But hopefully, as my friend and colleague Michelle Gabrielle Paris says, hopefully that plants the seeds of the resiliency we need to keep connecting. And so, yes, Liz Cohen and others, Jorge Figuera, there's a lot of people who are doing amazing work. Yeah, I know Jorge, but I would love to talk more with people I think there's a lot of students, and this is a great project for youth. Like if we can get grants for youth to have iPads, or they could use different technology in their classroom, this is something youth could do, is record stories of their elders, make it an intergenerational project on resilience. I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities. This is just one small version trying coming out of the height of the pandemic. And I would love to talk to people more that would be interested in that. So thanks.
Yes, thank you for that great question. I'm going to keep us moving along, and if we can get to more questions in the chat, we will certainly try to. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Evan. He is a conservation filmmaker and photographer, the creator of Fire Forest. He started out on a prescribed fire cruise and doing forest restoration with the Nature Conservancy. And he now works for the National Audubon Society. So any other bird nerds out there? All right, Evan, I'll pass it to you to present your own screen, in fact.
Thank you. Yeah, I will share that now. All right, can everyone see a big slide with a river?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Barrientos. I'm a conservation photographer and filmmaker. And today I'm going to tell you about a long-term multimedia project that I've been running for the last 3 years to build support for forest restoration and resilience by explaining it with multimedia. And in it, you'll learn a bit about forest ecology and what forest resilience is. You'll see some techniques for explaining resilience, and you'll learn about some resources that you can use to do that in your own work. And if you're not in the world of forest or fire yourself, hopefully you'll still get an example and a framework of communicating complex issues with visuals. So I'm passionate about making impactful stories about conservation, supporting conservation. And as we all know, issues are complex. Important issues are complex. They don't have clear right and wrong answers, clear problems, and clear solutions. They're nuanced. And often there's a strong social component involved. And that makes it even more complex because changing minds is really hard, especially now. We know that in-person experiences are one of the best ways at getting people to do that. If you can take people to a site and see a project or introduce them to people from a different background, that's great. But that's not usually feasible for everyone who needs to be reached. And so one thing that I do is try to recreate some of those experiences with multimedia, because we can explain a lot with visuals. And during the Cameron Peak fire, I felt that this was one issue that wasn't being fully and nuanced, communicated in nuance. And this concerned me as much as the fire itself, because while fire is the problem, it's also the solution. I come from a background with fire, so I approach it a little bit differently than most people do. But starting in 2015, I started reintroducing fire on prescribed burns to ecosystems that depend on them. Things like here in southern Florida's pine flatwoods, and Nebraska's tallgrass prairies, and in Oregon's montane forests. And I've seen firsthand how fire restores ecosystems and restores their resilience to disturbance. And during the Cameron Peak fire, coverage, understandably, was really focused on the bad. During those days of orange skies, it's news cameras zoom in on the biggest flames and the blackest aftermath, and then left. And then that cycle repeats with the next fire. And while that's part of the story, and those are legitimate problems, it's not the whole story. The situation is more complex than that. And the reality is, to build resilience to wildfire, we need to better explain fire. but this topic is hard for people to access. Not many people ever get to see forest fire. It's hard to see, but visuals can help do that. And I wanted to use photography and videography to help paint a more complete picture of the complicated role of fire in Colorado's forests, and with Cameron Peak specifically. In case anyone doesn't know and is new to the state, Cameron Peak was the largest wildfire in Colorado's history in 2020. And my goals were to show people that fire is a natural part of Colorado's forests. Fire's effects are diverse, and fire can be beneficial to forests. And if we prepare forests to receive fire, they can rebound from it naturally. A very brief primer on forest ecology. So fires have been moving through Colorado's forests for essentially as long as they've existed, and there's a natural resilience and adaptations to them. But starting in the early 1900s, the US started suppressing fires really aggressively, putting them all out. And without natural recurring fires, forests grew overly dense, denser than they had ever been, like you see here in this photo. And that leads to more fuel. All of this is fuel, which means more severe fires. And it was homogeneous fuel, which makes for larger fires, which is what gets us to where we're at today, mega fires, like here above Chambers Lake, up the Poudre Canyon. So, while fire has a natural role, at the same time, increasingly large and severe fires are a problem. They are a threat to our forests. So I also wanted to increase support for building their resilience to fire in the forms of forest thinning and prescribed burning. And very quick background on that. The abundance of scientific literature tells us that the most effective way to restore forest resilience to fire is first by selectively thinning the forests that have grown overly dense to densities that can then allow reintroduction of fire under moderate weather conditions in what's called prescribed burning or controlled burning. And so this is what I was trying to work towards. So back in the very beginning of 2021, I planned this long-term multimedia project to do that, pitched it to these groups that you see here, was honored when they all agreed to fund it and or guide it, and thus Fire Forest was born. One thing that I knew I needed to do was show the connection between fire, forests, and water, because through water, essentially everyone's connected to this. And I wanted to do it in a way that would catch people's attention. So with the help of a group called Platte Basin Time Lapse, I set up a long-term time-lapse camera on the Poudre River as it runs through an area burned by the Cameron Peak fire. And starting in May of 2021, the camera's taken periodic photos every day during the day. And during the summer of 2021, it documented those extreme turbidity events when high rainfall flushed all that sediment and ash into the Poudre River, like you're seeing right here, leading to the Black Hollow flood. And in doing this, it's giving us a tool to show people for the first time that connection between forest and fire and water in a way that hasn't been done. It also has helped us show things like the long-term accumulation of sediment in the riverbed to help people understand why years later we're still seeing the river turn black after high rainfall, because it's the sediment's in the riverbed. It's getting resuspended. So that's still ongoing. A second component is photo monitoring. I was really curious to see how different forest types would respond and to document that, because we know that forests' resilience to fire is getting stretched. As our climate's getting hotter and drier, it's getting harder for trees to regenerate after fire. We don't know what the forests will look like in a decade, and we don't even know if there will be a forest after a decade after these fires. So I wanted to explore that using high precision repeat photo points that let you compress years into seconds And I set about a dozen of these up in different forest types that burned at different intensities and photographed them right after the Cameron Peak fire in May of 2021, then at the end of the growing season in August, and then the following August, and then last August. And here's what I saw. So in high severity fire and lodgepole forest, there's a mixed response. In some areas, we see almost no plant growth after 2 growing seasons, but we do see erosion of the soil in the absence of that vegetation. But in some points, I did find that natural resilience. If you watch right about here, you'll see lodgepole seedlings sprouting up that first year in the ashes. And that continued over the last 2 years. A couple didn't make it, but this one's still going strong. Here's a different angle. You can see as these guys go from being babies to what I call lodgepole teenagers, scraggly and awkward and weird. But then last year they started to hit their stride and continue to grow along with a lot of other plant species. And this shows us that it lets us show people that there's hope, even when a forest looks completely black, that a black forest isn't destroyed. It shows forests' natural ability to recover from fire. And if we prepare forests to receive fire, then they can express that resilience to it. And another point, photo point further lower elevation shows that in a really exciting way. This is from a stand that was thinned before the Cameron Peak fire got to it. And the fire there was really low intensity. And in the first year, there was just an amazing flush of wildflowers and grasses. And that continued in the second year, although a bit drier. Things got interesting last year, though, when you look at the trees. So if you look at an individual tree, this one at first seems like it's dead. And I was so excited that first growing season that it resprouted green needles at the top. And that continued in the second summer, and it seemed like things were great. But then this year I went back and some of these trees were turning brown again. So I don't know what the takeaway is yet, except that time and nuance are important. Not one of these snapshots tells the whole story, and we need these sorts of long-term stories to cover that. So stay tuned, because I'm still going to be going back there this year. Third was a photo essay that is intended to show people the diversity of fire's effects, to give people a picture beyond a giant wall of flames that leaves forests completely black and dead, because there's a spectrum of fire severity from low to high. And although we've seen a concerning growth in high severity fire, all fire types have their place in Colorado's forests, and these low and moderate intensity burns are so important for restoring forest resilience. So I went out to look for these burn effects, and I did see a concerning amount of high severity fire, but I kept looking, and pretty much everywhere I went, I could still find some good fire effects, the kinds that weren't being shown on the news or on Instagram. I found beautiful burn mosaics like this, which are so important for preventing future megafires, because when your forest looks like this, it's a lot harder to have a 200,000 acre fire. I also found amazing regrowth and resilience in the plants. In many areas, the burn released a flush of nitrogen and phosphorus. The reduced canopy cover allowed for more sunlight and created just gorgeous wildflower super blooms. And I found hope in sites like lodgepole seedlings sprouting from the ashes. Last, my current focus is on editing a short film about how forest thinning done by the Larimer Conservation District and a U.S. Forest Service prescribed burn helped firefighters stop a portion of the Cameron Peak fire at Drala Mountain Center. We know that stories are one of our best shots at making people consider another perspective and rethink their own. And this is an amazing story that needs to be told widely. Its intent is to encourage more landowners and land managers to adopt or facilitate forest restoration on their property by demonstrating the amazing potential payoff that it can have. So I'm editing it now and will be soon partnering with organizations to screen it across Colorado this year. So how can any of you apply any of this? Well, for one thing, you can use all these resources. The whole intent with Fire Forest is to create these high quality, long-term resources to be used by organizations that are working in forest health, wildfire safety, wildfire recovery, watershed, water quality, because not everyone has time to make these kinds of things. So I want it to be useful to you all. And also, like, the idea is, I don't have a huge audience. The idea is to put it into your hands and get it in front of the people who need to see it. The recreationists, the land managers, the politicians, the funders. It's really meant to build support and social license for the work that you're doing. And if you're not in any of those spheres, I've thought about talking a bit about the framework of communicating all of this, but seeing where we're at on time, I think I'll save that. But hopefully you've at least had a chance to get an example of some ideas and some tactics that can be used to explain the issues that you're working on. Last, here's my contact info. Really, please do reach out if you're interested in using any of these materials, if you're interested in collaborating on anything. I really do want these materials to get out there and support the work that you're doing. So please get in touch, and thank you all for your time and your interest.
Yay, thank you so much, Evan. It's both beautiful and informative. I am going to open it up now to questions, so feel free to drop that into the chat. I see a lot of inspiration. For me, when I listen to your presentation, Evan, I think about the Native and Indigenous people of this region and how they used fire in land management and stewardship. And that was actually a question that someone had asked to Ernest House Jr. earlier, but we didn't get to it. And it was, as communities in Colorado put more focus and funding towards wildfire and flood management, how can we better partner with the traditional stewards of this land? Do you have a perspective on if or how Indigenous people have been using fire, or any practices that are happening now?
Yes, I'll say that I'm not an authority on this. I'm not an expert, but I'll say that currently I'm trying to find the right people to talk to about this, because I do want this film in my film to talk about that, white settlers didn't invent prescribed fire. This was happening long before the 20th century. And it would be good to include that. But as I'm reaching out to different Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute people and people who work with tribes, it's hard to find that knowledge still, at least in my experience so far. Maybe it's just not the right people yet, but the history of people being just relocated so far has made it really challenging. So I guess all I can really offer is that it's not easy to do the right thing and do the right research, but it's important to. And it hasn't been done enough in the past, or maybe it's just that we need to work to rebuild and restore some of that.
Great, that's really helpful, and I appreciate that you're trying to do that research, and hope you find someone. Take that as a call for anyone who has connections.
Yeah, I am currently talking to the Southern Ute tribe, because they have a good forestry team. So hopeful that something will turn up there. Yeah. Is it all right if I answer the question about the name for Fire Forest?
Yeah, that's where it's going to go next.
So it's akin to rainforest. We think of rainforests as forests that are formed and shaped by rain. Our forests in Colorado and much of the West are fire forests. They've been shaped by fire for millennia, and that's that's what I'm trying to instill in people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Evan and Phaedra. This has been really enlightening and inspiring. Fortunately, it will be recorded. And I know we're about to welcome in the other breakout group, and we'll be doing report outs. But yeah, plenty to follow up on. If anyone wants to take a break before we return to the full session, please feel free to do so and stretch, and we'll look forward to welcoming and hearing the report out from the other breakout.
Hey, Marguerite, I think there's one more question for Evan in the chat there.
Oh, great. Evan, don't go stretch yet. Evan, the question's from Kevin Vasquez. When will you start screening your film? Is anyone doing similar work in Northern California?
I don't know exactly when I'll start screening it, in part because I'm trying to figure out if there will be an Indigenous part of the film. But this year, really hopefully this spring when things warm up. But yeah, I don't have an exact date. And there is a cool group in California. I think Gathering Voices Society, I think is the name. I haven't worked directly with them, but I've seen them. And there's probably a lot more too that I'm not aware of.
Oops. Great. And we just have a recommendation for your name and email in the chat.
Oh, yes. My email.
Wonderful. We have 26 seconds for everyone to stretch. So the other breakout group will be coming right over. And just again, really appreciate our speakers today and everyone's participation.
All right. So I think the breakout room is now closed and folks are coming back to join us. I hope everyone enjoyed their sessions. And again, I know a lot of folks are having trouble choosing between each one. Thankfully, both were recorded and will be available to you all following today's event. Before we kind of rounded this out today and give our closing remarks, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators, Marguerite and Julia, to give some kind of key takeaways from each session. So Marguerite, if you want to start.
Yes, and I'm told I have a minute and a half to summarize some really great points. So I'll be quick, but we started off with some theory and practice of how we tell stories using data and not using data and going beyond the data. And that was from Phaedra. And so with the theory, she talked a lot about how we know from environmental justice communities that data alone is insufficient, and we need to identify and tell community stories, and making sure that our stories are empowering communities and not focusing on the negative or the need, and how we can avoid narrative fatigue or asking communities to retell their stories over and over. And in practice, Phaedra really exemplified this with story maps that her and a team of students made to complement the data that is presented in EnviroScreen that identifies disproportionately impacted communities. There's a series of story maps that have multimedia, audio, visual maps that really tell the story of climate adaptation and other stories across different communities here in Colorado, which is really awesome. And then Evan told his story of fire forest, where coming out of the Cameron Peak fires and other mega fires, how he's able to beautifully and informatively showcase through time-lapse photography and photo monitoring how forests can withstand, receive, and rebound from fires, and what that means and how we can do better in the future of managing forests with fire and not taking on the media perspective of wildfires being only negative. So with that, I'll pass it over to Julia to report out on her breakout.
Yeah, okay. I'll just do a couple key highlights. We had 3 speakers in ours. The first was Pat, who is a professor at CSU, and he talked a lot about supporting his students in visioning the future and using that as a tool for kind of being stuck in the present. So storytelling in a way of like being able to vision different models of expressing radical futures, and there being like no single answer to what we can vision, and therefore no single answer to what we can do right now. And he noticed that a lot of the students felt a lot more, a bigger sense of agency after doing this work, rather than being kind of stuck in the doom and gloom of the current crisis. Then we moved over to Sarah, who talked a bit about storytelling-based communications that, you know, are centered around water, but really working on meeting many different types of communities where they're at and being able to kind of push through some of stagnation and fatigue around climate work. She highlighted things like leading with values and speaking to problems and offering solutions. So really not getting bogged down too much in the problem, but really kind of coalescing around shared values, human rights values that everyone can kind of get along behind. And one thing I really like that she said was her equation she kind of thinks of for this work is urgency plus hope equals action, which I thought was really powerful. And then just to round out, we had a great presentation from Heather, who is a facilitator for environmental issues. And her presentation really talked around how we can find commonality with diverse stakeholders and potentially stakeholders who don't want to agree. Really thinking about how it's okay to mess up, it's okay to be human in those spaces, and it's okay and good to really push for vulnerability, push for shared just like stories from your life that might not even be about the environmental issue or the political issue, but just trying to connect as humans through stories about the past or stories about ways that they want to move forward, and being able to kind of use those frameworks to find more commonality that might not be as easy if you're just focusing on the political context. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you guys so much for participating, and I will turn it back over to Shale.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Marguerite, for those report outs. As a reminder, we will be providing a takeaway document for everyone. So more details will be included in each of those as well. So while these 2 hours went by so fast, and I wish that we could just continue this conversation throughout the rest of the week, we do have to come to a close. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our director, Ann Miller. Again, my name is Shale Sabo. Thank you so much for letting me MC this event today, and I will turn it over to Ann to finish off the session.
Wow, what an amazing last 2.5 hours. Thank you for the speakers and all the participants. As we close this year's Resiliency Summit, I invite you to carry forward the energy and the inspiration we've gained today to really fuel the collaborative work ahead. There's a lot of it. And we've had the opportunity to explore a lot of solutions and tools and creative ways to spur that action. I did want to just flag a couple additional resources to add to your arsenal. Resources that are on our website from the Resiliency Toolkit. If you want to be drilling down into setting more metrics and getting into the data, the Resilience and Assessments Action Guide is a good one, as well as our dashboard. So some more story maps and visualizations. We've got case studies, etc. And then if you want to take action and you need some money to do that, we've got some other sources of funding. The local community funding guide on the DOLA website is also a great kind of one-stop clearinghouse to navigate out based on what problem you're trying to solve, whether it's energy, natural resources, etc. It has federal and state funding in there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, last year, we set up the Climate Resilience Challenge, $20 million to some local governments that received those grants, and we're going to be offering another round of those starting March 1st. And those are for local governments to take bold action on climate mitigation and adaptation projects. So you can find out more about that. So when you registered for this event, we asked you to share your biggest challenges as it relates to telling your stories around climate adaptation. And, you know, there were some common themes that can hopefully help you see that you have shared challenges and opportunities and connections here today. So firstly, we understand the concerns around confidence and your ability to tell stories, ability to reach across those diverse audiences, and of course, like the capacity, the people power. We hope that today's event inspired you to tap into the often unappreciated or underappreciated resource in our communities, the artists and creatives, and got energized about what is possible there. It's not common that we see this kind of partnership between government entities and artists. And gosh, I think we saw that there's a lot of opportunities to go deeper in how we tell our stories and who we partner with. Secondly, in Breakout Session 1, we discussed ways in which the tools you use can help tell the stories and data and visual platforms. And Breakout 2 dove into the challenge of bringing different perspectives and beliefs together to find that common ground towards shared action. In the chat, if you feel inspired here in the final minutes to throw in any other important stories or links to articles or case studies or anything that you want to share with other participants here that you've been inspired by in your community, or other links. So as we move into 2024, the CRO team will work to bring these stories forward through our ongoing webinars, peer exchanges, case studies. We'll also, as I mentioned earlier, be engaging in a planning process to update the Colorado Resiliency Framework in 2025, and stay tuned for how to get engaged. You can also sign up if you're not already signed up for our monthly newsletter, and check out our website here. So we express our deepest gratitude for your participation today. We hope, again, that we've inspired you and you've inspired each other to think about storytelling in a new light. Please be on the lookout for materials in the coming week, including a survey on how we can continue to improve our summits. And a big thanks to our presenters, the CRO team, and a special shout out to Shale Sabo for organizing and moderating the event. And with that, we conclude today's summit. Thank you.